Today we'll be covering the ancient cave anomalies Iceberg, from hybrids between human species, mysterious megalithic sites, and mummies of extinct animals. I've been studying archaeology for a decade, but some of these entries genuinely shocked me. You guys know the drill, no AI slop was used in the entirety of this video. I have an incredible writer and editor who get paid to tell the human story. So let's jump right into the first discovery. We have to start this list with Chauvet Cave, home to some of the greatest cave art ever made. Located in southern France, the cave contains artwork over 30,000 years old. Most of the paintings consist of depictions of animals in anatomical detail. The lions have to be my favorite. Their lifelike depictions perfectly capture a lion on the hunt. To the left of them are various herbivores they seem to be hunting. This woolly mammoth with big foot pads is one of the most interesting depictions in the cave. Woolly rhinos are also heavily featured. This depiction is quite famous, with a dozen rhinos seemingly drawn over one another. Nearby, 2 fighting rhinos can be found. It is unbelievably fascinating to think that someone 30,000 years ago witnessed this epic fight and just had to paint it on cave walls. Little did they know that millions of people would see it. But besides the cave paintings, this cave bear skull has fascinated me for years. Someone 30,000 years ago picked it up, looked in its vacant eyes, and set the osseous mass upon this pedestal. And for all of human history, it has remained. Plants and animals were tamed, civilization emerged, great wars were fought, and entire peoples were lost. Yet this skull sat untouched in the silent darkness, and hopefully it will remain here, untouched long after we are gone. Next, we are moving on to the Dead Sea Scrolls. Almost everybody has heard about them, but what actually are they and what did they prove? In 1946, a shepherd looking for his goat in a cave threw a rock in to spook the goat out, but instead he heard pottery break. Climbing inside, he noticed tall clay jars, some with scrolls in them. Archaeologists eventually made it to the site and found over 1,000 manuscripts preserved, including nearly every book of the Hebrew Bible. They are by far the oldest copies, with the oldest dating back to 200 BC. But what did they actually prove? Some manuscripts match the traditional Hebrew text almost exactly, but others such as Exodus and Samuel show huge differences in language and content. This forced scholars to rethink how the biblical texts were developed. It's now clear that the Old Testament stayed fluid for centuries. The Dead Sea Scrolls didn't disprove any religion. They just show that real people, scribes, and religious leaders chose which texts became scripture and which ones didn't. But next, we're moving on to Homo floresiensis, the tiny hobbit species of humans. They were discovered in a cave in 2003 on the Indonesian island of Flores. The remains consisted of a nearly complete individual named LB1. She was around 30 years old at her time of death, but stood just 3 feet 6 inches tall. Eventually, the remains of at least 15 individuals were unearthed, proving that the entire population was this small. But their size wasn't their only oddity. They featured a combination of archaic and advanced traits, some similar to species like Homo habilis, and others like modern humans. They were designated an entirely new species, Homo floresiensis. Their small stature seems to be the result of insular dwarfism, the evolutionary process where large animals tend to shrink when restricted to island environments due to limited resources. This is a well-documented phenomenon, creating the pygmy mammoths in the Mediterranean and dog-sized hippopotamus which are still alive today. Stone tools suggest that hominids first arrived on the island some 1 million years ago, and they gradually shrunk over time. The island was also home to dwarf stegodon the size of cows, huge rats, giant storks, and Komodo dragons. Their world was something out of a fantasy story, but to them it was a constant fight for survival. They used stone tools, hunting giant rats and scavenging stegodon carcasses. The youngest floresiensis remains date to around 60,000 years ago, and their unique stone tool tradition disappeared 50,000 years ago. Our species appeared on the island around this time and may have led to their extinction. But local folklore says otherwise. Stories existed before the discovery of Homo floresiensis about little hairy people who dwelled in caves called the Ibu Gogo. They would attempt to steal human children but were always easily outwitted. They persisted all the way up until the 18th century, when villagers gave them palm fibers to make clothing. After bringing it into their cave, the villagers cruelly threw in a burning stick, killing all inside. While this story is very intriguing, no recent remains of Homo floresiensis have ever been found. meaning the youngest are 60,000 years old. It is certainly possible they survived far longer, and I am even willing to believe that the locals may have folklore related to late surviving floresiensis. But up until the 18th century sounds a bit fantastical to me. I'm going to keep my mind open, and hopefully future research reveals more about their extinction. But regardless, they are one of the strangest discoveries ever found in a cave. But now we are moving on to another example of fantastic ancient art. At the site of Cueva de las Manos in Argentina, researchers found hundreds of cave paintings. Most of them consist of hand stencils, painted by blowing pigment over your hand, leaving personal, individual markers. Hundreds of these handprints were made, many requiring some kind of ladder. The meaning is unknown. Other paintings in the cave depict animals and hunters. The paintings have been dated from 9,000 to 2,000 years ago, meaning that this one cave was painted for a longer period than humans have been writing. But next, we are moving on to Lion Man, one of the most famous examples of Ice Age art. He was found in a German cave near the Alps. Carved of ivory, the figure is huge. Here is a life-size model I 3D printed. It depicted a half lion, half man, with strange carvings. Dating back to 40,000 years ago, it was made shortly after our species arrived in Europe. It was once assumed art this far back would be primitive, but this figure is as sophisticated as most art from ancient Egypt. Researchers believe it depicts a shaman. Shamans act as an intermediary between the physical and spiritual world. They often dress as animals to gain spiritual knowledge and guidance, which they then bring back to their people. Shamanism was once spread all over the world, possibly being the first religion ever practiced. Lion Man proved that even 40,000 years ago, humans had complex artistic capabilities and spiritual beliefs. But now we are moving on to the weirdest cave discovery that you all have probably heard of, Homo naledi. This species of human was only discovered in 2013 in the Rising Star Cave system of South Africa. Archaeologists ventured deep into the cave system, squeezing through nutty putty-sized channels to eventually find over 1,500 fragments of human bones. Putting them together, it was apparent that they had made a monumental discovery. 15 individuals in total were found. They were small-bodied with small brains and very strange and primitive skeletal features. They had many features in common with the Australopithecines who lived millions of years ago, but their skulls and brain anatomy clearly belongs to our genus Homo. Dating to 200 to 300,000 years ago, they lived in Africa at the same time our ancestors were emerging, meaning we must have encountered them. But even stranger, their remains were found deep in the cave, at the bottom of a perilous 40-foot drop. How they navigated this far into a pitch-black cave and ended up at the bottom of this chamber has remained a mystery. They almost certainly needed fire in order to get this far into the cave, and many have suggested that these individuals were thrown into this chamber as a form of burial. Some have even hypothesized that Naledi may have been specially adapted to living in caves, possibly clicking like a bat to navigate and communicate. Most scholars are critical of the burial or cave-adapted idea, but in June of this year, a new discovery was a complete curveball in our understanding. Based on protein from the teeth, they found that all of the hominids were biologically female. This makes this controversial site even more confusing. What I love about this site is that the entire species is only known from this one cave. It's remarkable that hundreds of thousands of them lived throughout their time on Earth, yet this is all we have to prove it. There are undoubtedly many other human species waiting to be discovered. But now we are moving on to Tier 2, striking discoveries. And we are starting off hot with a mineralized Neanderthal. In 1993, researchers found this skull deep within a cave in southern Italy. It clearly belonged to a Neanderthal, but it was covered in thick layers of calcite. This mineral layer actually helped to preserve the skull, and X-rays proved that it is the best preserved Neanderthal ever found. The teeth are extraordinarily well preserved, and using uranium-thorium dating, they found out he was 170,000 years old. But his other remains told the story about how he ended up here. He fell down a 33-foot sinkhole in the cave, and unable to escape with no food or water, he perished in the darkness after days of silence. But now we are moving on to an even more insane example, an entire skeleton mineralized. This is the Cave of the Crystal Sepulchre, or in Mayan, Actun Tenuchil Macnal. Mayans believed that caves like this were the gateway to the underworld. Priests traveled deep within them to perform rituals, give offerings, and sometimes conduct human sacrifices. Hundreds of ceramic pots have been found, along with human remains. The most striking of all is the Crystal Maiden. The remains were found to consist of a 17-year-old boy, likely sacrificed over 1,000 years ago. Over the centuries, limestone-rich water has slowly built up calcite on his bones, immortalizing this poor boy for eternity. Mayans believed that the gods dwelled in these caverns, and during times of severe drought or famine, sacrifice could bring relief to their people. It is certainly sad, but we should be careful not to judge humans who live before the world of modern science, as people were sacrificed, persecuted, and slain for all kinds of arbitrary reasons across the world. But the biggest danger for ancient humans were not even each other, but rather diseases and wounds they left untreated. But in the modern day, we don't have to put off getting medical attention. This is why this video is sponsored by ZocDoc, a website that allows you to book and keep track of appointments with ease. Luckily, I have been mostly healthy recently, but one thing I have been dealing with is knee pain. I have a goal of getting my vertical up to 40 inches, which is no easy feat. It requires constant jumping and lifting, which puts incredible strain on my knees. I kept putting off treatment until I found ZocDoc. Through ZocDoc, I found a physical therapist, and now with daily isometric holds, my knees feel way better, good enough to jump 30 inches. Yeah, I have about a foot to go. ZocDoc is basically a search engine for doctors. Over 150,000 providers across 200 plus specialties in all 50 states. And you can filter by insurance to find in-network doctors so you're not gambling on your bill. It allows you to read real patient reviews, which helped me a ton because other patients were dealing with knee pain as well, and I decided to use their same physical therapist. Most bookings land within 24 to 72 hours, and you can even score same-day appointments, and it's completely free to use. I know it may seem small, but clicking the link in the description is a huge step towards prioritizing your health. Head to ZocDoc.com/North02 to get started and check that appointment off your to-do list. Thank you once again to ZocDoc for sponsoring this video and for helping us all take better care of our health. Next, we're moving all the way down to New Zealand, where caves have preserved the remains of giant extinct birds. New Zealand has been separated from every other landmass for 85 million years, before the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs. Because of this, the animals on the island have evolved in isolation, with only birds, which are themselves descendants of the dinosaurs, having the ability to fly to the island. Because of this, it was ruled by birds for millions of years. They evolved to fill every major ecological niche. The moa became the large herbivores, feasting on vegetation and growing to a monstrous size. The largest were 12 feet tall and weighed over 500 pounds. Nearly a dozen different species were spread all over the island. But when humans showed up 700 years ago, they feasted on these large defenseless animals, eventually leading to their extinction. But fortunately, their mummified remains have been preserved in extremely dry caves. This includes multiple perfectly preserved heads along with this striking foot that looks like it came from a dinosaur. Well, I guess it did because technically birds are avian dinosaurs. And these preserved footprints from moa look exactly like footprints from the Jurassic period. But what's even more insane than these giant birds were the predators that hunted them. Only 500 years ago, the largest eagle that ever lived still stalked the skies of New Zealand. Its name was Haast's eagle. At twice the size of the largest eagles alive today, it terrorized the far larger moa. Using its claws, at a full dive it could hit its targets with the same energy as a modern rifle bullet. Yes, do the math. 40 pounds moving at 50 miles an hour equals 4,532 joules of kinetic energy. A .308 caliber rifle round, the most common sniper rifle caliber in the world, produces 3,700 joules of energy when impacting a target. Of course, the impact is different because it has 8 razor-sharp talons on massive feet, but the impact would have been enough to incapacitate any animal on the island, including humans. And that brings us to the next cave discovery, a painting of the Haast's eagle by the Maori that really saw them. At the Cave of the Eagle, on the ceiling a massive eagle was painted. It clearly had a light head and dark-colored body, leading to the idea that these eagles might have looked like bald eagles, or more likely they had featherless heads like a vulture. This would have been useful for eating organs out of a moa, or possibly human corpses. Maori traditions undoubtedly reference the Haast's eagle, which survived up until the mid-1440s. Some South Island Maori traditions describe a man-eating bird. They called it the puakai, literally meaning old glutton. In certain stories, it swoops down to carry people off. In others, it kills and consumes children. Paul Schofield, lead researcher on the Haas eagle, said, "The science supports Maori mythology of the legend of Puakai, a huge bird that could swoop down on people in the mountains and was capable of killing a small child. They had the ability to not only strike with their talons, but to close the talons and put them through quite solid objects such as a pelvis. It was designed as a killing machine." End quote. There are other stories about the Haas eagle, some describing it as a giant black and white bird with a red crest and a huge beak. The Haas eagle would have primarily eaten moa, but it's insane to think that eagles were hunting humans only 500 years ago. Their extinction was undoubtedly tied to the overhunting of the moa by the Polynesian immigrants. But next, let's move on to another cave mummy, but this time, the remains of giant ground sloths. That's right, archaeologists have found multiple mummified remains of giant ground sloths. These animals could be huge, with the largest species weighing more than an elephant. At Mylodon Cave in the Patagonia region of Chile, researchers found large pieces of mummified hide, along with bones and poop. They found that the skin contained thousands of tiny bones embedded in it, providing the sloth with a natural chainmail-like armor. The specimen dated back to 13,200 years ago, well within the last ice age. In New Mexico, another discovery was made, this time a Shasta ground sloth with intact ligaments, muscle fibers, and yellowish-brown hair. The individual seems to have fallen into a volcanic vent, and with no way out, slowly perished. The remains dated to between 10 to 11,000 years ago, which is pretty recent, proving they survived the end of the last ice age for at least 1,000 years. And we are staying on sloths for the next topic, giant sloth burrows. These sloth-made caves were absolutely massive. They were tall enough to stand in, with the longest reaching over 2,000 feet in length. These burrows were made by sloths and giant armadillos by scratching away the dirt walls with their claws. Despite these animals being large, their burrows were made far wider and deeper than researchers expected. These burrows kept them safe from predators like the giant Smilodon populator, the largest saber-toothed cat to ever live. They may have also protected these animals from extreme weather, and certainly from wildfires. When humans migrated into the region, they of course took interest in these burrows. At the Toca do Tatu sloth burrow in Brazil, humans made art in sloth burrows. They engraved geometric grids, radial patterns, and other mysterious shapes. Venturing into one of these sloth burrows could have been the last thing you ever did. These sloths were massive, armed with claws that could tear you to shreds. And it's truly sad that these animals ended up going extinct. The next cave discovery is known as Littlefoot. This was the nickname given to one of the most complete ancient human ancestors ever found. Despite having a nearly whole skeleton, Littlefoot remains an evolutionary ghost scientists can't fully understand. 3 million years ago, this individual fell to death in the Sterkfontein caves of South Africa. Her body was trapped in a deep, vertical shaft and buried under layers of sediment that would harden into rock. She remained hidden until the 1990s, when archaeologists began their 20-year excavation of the site. They uncovered up to 90% of her skeleton, and unlike typically fragmented fossils, her bones were almost flawless. She had an intact skull, limbs, and even tiny foot bones. And those tiny feet helped us learn that she was a creature who balanced tree climbing and walking on the ground. But her real age is still kind of a mystery. Advanced sediment dating places her at a staggering 3.6 million years old. This makes her much older than the more famous Australopithecus fossil known as Lucy. But rival researchers argue that the surrounding cave geology proves she can't be much older than 2.8 million years old. But what's even more mysterious is her identity. She's long been classified as various branches of Australopithecines. Some say Afarensis, others say Africanus. But a groundbreaking 2026 study challenges many of these claims. Digital facial reconstructions and cranial scans reveal that her eye sockets were abnormally wide. They don't match any known species. And because of this, some experts now think that she represents an entirely unidentified human relative. So Littlefoot might be the only member of the species that we've ever discovered. Now we are moving on to Tier 3, Deep Archaeology. And let's start with one of the biggest discoveries of the century, Denisovans. In 2008, Russian researchers identified a strange bone from Denisova Cave in Siberia. Genetic testing proved that it was neither a Homo sapien nor a Neanderthal. They truly had found an entirely new species of human. And further discoveries cemented the Denisovans as an entire branch of humans that lived across Asia. But only a couple of years later, they made an even more shocking discovery. This is Denisova 11. a single bone fragment which dated to 90,000 years ago. It was nothing special until genetic testing revealed that it was a hybrid between two human species. The fossil belonged to a young girl, with a Denisovan father and a Neanderthal mother. This is the only example of a first-generation hybrid between two human species ever discovered. Her mother's Neanderthal DNA was most closely related to other specimens all the way in Croatia, suggesting long-distance migration across the Eurasian steppe. Her father's Denisovan line was native to the region, but had evidence of Neanderthal interbreeding about 300 generations before. This suggests that this was truly the edge of both the Neanderthal and Denisovan world, where two distinct lineages came together in a single cave. They must have looked very distinct from each other, different skin tones, hair types, and overall appearance. But of course it didn't stop them from reproducing. Our species later showed up in Denisova Cave around 45,000 years ago, as evidenced both by DNA and an explosion in symbolic elements like pendants, rings, and this stunning green bracelet. It is truly an exceptional artifact, but people have used it to claim Paleolithic humans had some kind of advanced drilling technology. In reality, it was likely made with a bow drill or hand drill with a flint bit on it. It's still one of the coolest artifacts I've seen from the Ice Age. Regardless, Denisova Cave has yielded some of the most important archaeological remains ever found, and new remains of Denisovans are discovered every few months. Next, we are moving on to a topic that I yap about a lot, the old copper culture. In the Great Lakes regions of North America, archaeologists have found tens of thousands of copper artifacts, with the oldest dating back to 8,500 years ago. They were made from the naturally pure copper that is abundant in the region. But there are many misconceptions about this culture, one being that they didn't mine copper, and just found it lying on the ground. But the largest island in Lake Superior has shattered this misconception. Here, archaeologists have found more than 1,000 mines cut straight into the bedrock. Many of them consist of shallow pits, but others are 30 feet deep and 60 feet wide. Some of them are man-made caves straight into the earth. At the bottom, archaeologists have found hammerstones used to smash the bedrock, wooden ladders, copper chisels, and wooden wedges for moving large stones. These caves preserve the remains of a Native American copper mining industry that flourished thousands of years ago. I had the opportunity to visit some mines on the southern shore, and I even found a genuine old copper culture hammerstone. The story of this culture is still shrouded in mystery, but luckily I made an entire documentary for you all to enjoy. And that's why before the next entry, you should subscribe and leave me a comment about what I should cover next. So next, let's talk about the Ein Gedi Roman weapon cache. In 2023, researchers entered a remote desert cave overlooking the Dead Sea. They were initially there to photograph ancient Hebrew inscriptions on a stalagmite, but peering into a deep crevice, they made a once-in-a-lifetime discovery. A cache of 1900-year-old Roman weaponry was hidden inside, earning it the nickname Cave of Swords. The hoard contained a shafted javelin head known as a pilum, and 4 deadly iron swords. 3 of the swords were long spathai, a standard imperial cavalry sword. The 4th was a shorter ring pommel sword. The remarkably arid climate within the cave preserved these weapons in near mint condition. 3 of the iron blades were still tightly sheathed inside their original wooden and leather scabbards. But why were these official Roman assets hidden from view? Archaeologists strongly suspect the weapons were seized as military plunder from Roman units during the bloody Bar Kokhba revolt in 132 CE. They were hidden by Jewish rebels for a future battle that never came. Archaeologists did discover some supporting evidence of this at the entrance. They found a bronze coin dating precisely to the revolt. It was stamped with the words, "For the freedom of Jerusalem." The pristine condition of the iron, a metal that normally rusted dust in only centuries, proves these swords were carefully greased, wrapped, and stashed away for a counterattack. Whether the rebels were wiped out by the Roman legions or forced to flee in the desert night, we'll probably never find out. But man, I love me some Roman history, and it's cool to see their swords. But next we move on to the Cave of the Warrior. It's located near ancient Jericho in the Judean desert, and it holds a 6,000-year-old burial site. Archaeologists excavated it in 1993 and found a perfectly preserved skeleton of a man from the Chalcolithic period, also known as the Copper Age for the Old World. And the skeleton here was quickly dubbed the Warrior due to the striking grave goods buried with him. He rested on a woven reed mat and was completely wrapped in a pristine linen shroud. At his side was a magnificent flint knife, a beautifully crafted wooden bow, and a quiver full of arrows. He had leather sandals, a walking stick, and wooden bowls surrounded his remains. To add to the ritualistic setting, many of the personal artifacts were stained with red ochre. However, modern science seems to poke holes in the idea that this individual was a warrior. Recent CT scans and other anthropological data revealed that this individual was actually sickly. He lacked the heavy muscle anchor markings on his bones. He also showed serious degeneration in his joints. So he probably suffered from debilitating chronic pain towards the end of his life. And it begs the question, why would a physically weak individual be buried with the high status symbols of an elite hunter or military ruler? His true identity remains a mystery, but it's possible he had more of a shamanic role than a violent one. Next up is the burial of Rene Candide in Italy. 27,000 years ago, a community of hunter-gatherers claimed the limestone cliffs of Rene Candide as an ideal burial ground. And here a 15-year-old boy was found. He's been dubbed Il Principe, or the Prince, because he was buried under extraordinary circumstances. The prince was laid to rest on a bed of ochre, facing south towards the sea. He was adorned with a magnificent array of artifacts. These included a cap embellished with hundreds of marine shells, mammoth ivory pendants, and a large flint blade held in his hand. The sheer volume and craftsmanship of these items points to an immense investment of time and resources by his clan. But there are a few anomalies regarding his burial. First, his death was violent. He suffered a fatal blow to his left jaw and shoulder, likely from a large predator, the primary suspect being a massive cave bear. Forensic analysis reveals that he actually survived the initial mauling for several agonizing days. His community didn't abandon him. Instead, they brought him back to the cave and cared for his wounds until he took his final breath. Second, the burial shatters a long-held misconception about hunter-gatherer societies. We tend to think of these nomads as egalitarian, having little or no social hierarchies. But the prince belonged to the Gravettian culture. These were specialized mammoth hunters who lived in Europe during the last glacial maximum. The wealth of grave goods buried with him proves he held high status in their community. Whether that status was earned or inherited might be impossible to delineate. Nonetheless, the Prince of Rene Candide tells us that even ancient hunter-gatherers recognize certain individuals as special. Next, we are moving on to Shannon-Dar Cave, one of the most incredible Neanderthal sites ever discovered. Located in the Kurdistan region, it contains the remains of at least 9 Neanderthals dating between 35,000 and 65,000 years ago. First of all, what makes this site so interesting is that this time period was during the major spread of our species out of Africa and into new regions. The remains of Shannon-Dar III contain a spear wound to one of his ribs, consistent with that of a light dart from a spear thrower. This may suggest that it was our species that came into conflict with this individual. But this time period is also fascinating because the Neanderthals themselves had advanced technologically and culturally. Many of the Neanderthals at the site seem to have been purposely buried, and none more famous than the flower burial. Pollen found around the burial caused speculation that this Neanderthal was buried with flowers, suggesting symbolic and ritual behavior. This claim is not very supported by archaeological evidence, but this Neanderthal was certainly still buried. Though the most important find has to be Shannon-Dar I, the remains of a very old, crippled Neanderthal. His arm sustained an injury possibly leading to amputation, while both of his legs were broken at some point. He was also blind in one eye and his ears were clogged with bony growths. This man was fully disabled, and had been for a long time, but despite this, his people cared for him. He lived well into his 40s and likely into his 50s, a remarkable feat for having sustained so many injuries. People have a misconception that ancient humans suddenly dropped dead at 30, but this is a misunderstanding of life expectancy, which is heavily skewed by infants dying. In reality, if a Neanderthal survived their childhood, they could easily live into their 50s, 60s, and even older. I mean, hell, this chimpanzee is 83 years old. And though he's in captivity, wild chimpanzees have been known to reach their 60s. Shannon-Dar I remains direct proof that Neanderthals were capable of deep compassion. It is really one of the greatest discoveries of all time. Next, we are moving on to Tier 4, Obscure Finds. Starting with the Royal Cache of Egypt. In the mid-1800s, a shepherd's goat fell down a cave shaft, forcing him to descend to get it. In the darkness, torchlight revealed dozens of ancient mummies. Several had royal cobra headdresses on their coffins. He knew he had just made a discovery of a lifetime, but he kept it secret and started selling the remains on the black market. Luckily, the good old Egyptian government showed up and tortured them. They held out until an internal fight in the family, and one of them finally revealed the location to the authorities. Inside, they found some of the most important ancient Egyptian remains ever discovered. More than 50 kings, queens, and royal family members from the New Kingdom were there in the flesh. This includes famous pharaohs such as Thutmose I through III, Ramses I to the IV, Seti, Amenhotep, and several others. I can't emphasize how important these remains are. They are the literal bodies of some of the most important people in ancient history. It would be like finding a dozen Roman emperors in the flesh buried alongside Alexander Great and Aristotle. But these remains are far older. For example, Ramses III defeated the Sea People during the Bronze Age collapse over 3,000 years ago. But how did all of these mummies, some of them the most important in history, end up buried in a random hidden cave? Well, in the 10th century BC, the New Kingdom was declining significantly. The priests and administration staff knew that all of the great mummies were now vulnerable to grave robbery, a practice far too common in ancient Egypt. But the robbers didn't care for the mummies. They were after the jewelry and other precious objects buried alongside them. So they took all of the famous mummies and brought them here to sit protected for eternity. But I guess their plan worked, and now thousands of years later we can stare at the faces who altered world history. Next, we are moving on to a North American find. The oldest sewn animal hide ever found. It was found in Cougar Mountain Cave in the state of Oregon. It was dated to 12,000 years ago, during the end of the last ice age. The tattered artifact consists of 2 pieces of elk hide stitched together with plant fiber and animal hair cordage. This was likely used by Clovis hunters, the culture that spread across the continent hunting large animals such as bison and even mammoths. They seem to have been used as footwear or perhaps as part of a shelter. It's remarkable to find such direct evidence of what people were wearing 12,000 years ago. Next, we're moving on to the oldest footwear ever found, the Fort Rock Cave sandals. They were also found in a cave in Oregon and date back to 10,400 years ago. Made of sagebrush bark, they were meticulously woven to form strong padded protection against the sharp rocks of the region. Nearly 100 entire sandals were found in the cave, ranging from child to large adult size. Most of them were heavily worn and seem to have been discarded. Why they would go through the trouble of throwing them in this cave instead of just anywhere, we have no idea. The local Paiute people of the region still wore similar style sandals of sagebrush bark up until relatively recent times, carrying on the tradition for over 10,000 years. Pretty wild. Up next is the discovery of perfectly preserved spear throwers from caves in the southwest. The spear thrower, or the Aztec word atlatl, not atl, is a weapon that was once used all over the world, but its use gradually faded as the bow and arrow spread everywhere. Most Native American cultures stopped using the spear thrower around 3,000 years ago, with only the Aztecs and a handful of other people continuing to use them. But in the southwest, archaeologists have found perfectly preserved spear throwers from the basket maker people. They are very refined, with finger loops and stone counterweights to better balance when the dart is loaded. These tools prove how sophisticated even relatively simple hunting weapons could be. Next, we are moving back to Africa, where archaeologists have found the earliest evidence of poisoned arrowheads. At a rock shelter in South Africa, 60,000-year-old stone arrowheads were found with 2 types of plant toxins smeared on them. They were slow-acting poisons from a species of tumbleweed that gradually weakened their prey, making them far easier to run down and finish off. Other finds from nearby caves prove that poisoned arrows have been used in the region ever since. There are literally sand hunter-gatherers still using poison-tipped arrows to this day. They are the oldest branch to separate from the rest of humanity roughly 150,000 years ago, and they are truly unique-looking people. The fact that they have maintained their traditional hunter-gatherer lifestyle is remarkable, and I think we are all a bit jealous. Next, a topic that will really trip your understanding of time. At Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, researchers found a cave that literally saw humanity evolve. Using magnetostratigraphy on rock layers, they dated the earliest layers containing primitive stone tools to 1.8 million years ago. As time went on, these tools slowly got more complex. Countless faces saw the cave, slowly morphing over millennia. From Homo erectus to Homo heidelbergensis, and finally our species. This cave saw us become human. Countless babies were made here. Surely many people perished. Some people were probably murdered. Great feasts occurred. And the lion probably ran in and killed everybody at some point. All while this cave remained overhead. It puts into perspective just how young we are as a species. Shelters are still standing that house species well before our time. Now we are moving on to Tier 5, Strange Discoveries. First up, the Cave of Swimmers. In 1933, a Hungarian explorer, Laszlo Almasi, was on a journey deep into the heart of the Sahara. He theorized that the Sahara was once a lush region, which was controversial at the time. On the furthest edge of modern Egypt, he discovered a rock shelter on a barren cliff, and paintings inside the cave revealed something incredible: figures, limbs bent as if they were swimming. Other paintings depicted giraffes and hippopotamus, testifying to the presence of water. Laszlo's theory was correct. At some point deep within prehistory, the Sahara was lush. This now barren world was once home to large animals and populations of hunter-gatherers living rich lives. Decades of scientific discovery would prove that between 14,000 and 5,000 years ago, the Sahara was lush, home to massive lakes, endless wetlands, and thousands upon thousands of people. And the discovery all started with some cave paintings of people swimming. But now we're moving on to a truly bizarre find: the mummies of Mammoth Cave. Mammoth Cave in southern Kentucky is the longest cave system in the world, going on for 426 miles. It features massive chambers, stunning dripstone, and mineral deposits. Native Americans too realized its importance and ventured deep into the cave. They used reed torches to light their way and mussel shells to extract gypsum from the walls, used to make a bright white pigment. 2,500 years ago, a man entered the cave to mine gypsum. He traveled through chamber after chamber that had already been scraped clean. Finally, after 2 miles underground, he found some shining gypsum underneath a large boulder. Scraping the stones, he dislodged a smaller stone, and the 6-ton boulder came crashing down on him. His chest and hips were pinned beneath the mass, leaving him alive but hopelessly trapped. Eventually, he perished, and he slowly mummified in the dry, cool air of the cave. 2,500 years later, explorers mapping new sections of the cave came across his limbs protruding from a boulder. Telling the manager of the cave, he exclaimed, "So you finally found Lost John," in reference to a former employee who had gone astray. The name stuck, and with modern technology, workers finally removed the boulder from Lost John. It revealed a man 45 years of age, standing just 5'3" in life. He had a mussel shell, a few nuts to snack on, and a woven bag filled with gypsum. His remains were put on display for visitors to gawk at, but the new conditions led to fungus growth and deterioration. In 1976, new federal laws finally prohibited the display of Native American remains without the consent of their people, and the mummy was finally returned to his original resting place, where he remains today. Many other mummies have been found in Mammoth Cave. The remains of a woman with dozens of artifacts was found in stunning condition. She was buried with a bunch of fawn hoofs, which led to her being named the fawn hoof mummy. 2 other mummies were found sitting side by side. How creepy would it be to come across 2 mummies sitting side by side in a cave just revealed by torchlight? I mean, for a second you wouldn't even know if they were alive or dead. And unfortunately, P.T. Barnum got these mummies. He displayed them in his museum before it burned down, and one of them got destroyed and the other one got lost later on. A baby was even found in 1811, tightly wrapped in deer hides. It was brought out of the cave and quickly withered to dust due to the conditions of the outside air, and workers threw the rest of the remains in a furnace to dispose of it. Pretty sad if you ask me. It is strange to think that there are likely still many more Native American mummies sitting in eternal silence in the cave to this day. I could easily see a horror movie about this cave. I mean, it's so long, it'd basically be like the back rooms, but with a bunch of Native American mummies littered around. Alright, moving on to the next century. We have the remains of a now extinct people, still hanging from cave walls. The Bo people once lived along the mountainous border of Yunnan and Sichuan provinces in southern China. Ancient Chinese scholars referred to them as the Sons of the Cliff. They themselves were very mysterious, leaving almost no written records or even a language behind. But what remains are their dead, still buried on the side of cliff walls for over 2,000 years. They were carved from hollow logs and hauled up cliff faces as high as 400 feet to be placed. In the Sumawan Valley, there are 265 of these coffins still slinging to the rock. Their exact reasoning for such a labor-intensive and difficult burial is poorly understood. It certainly kept them safe from animals and grave robbers, and brought them closer to the sky. They carried on this tradition for thousands of years until the Mongols decimated their lands, and later, the Ming Dynasty erased entire villages and stripped away their cultural identity in a generation. The Bo people are essentially extinct, and now all that remains are thousands of hanging coffins. Next, we're moving on to another Chinese mystery, this time far older and far stranger: the Tarim mummies. They were first discovered by a Swedish explorer in 1934 while traversing China's extremely remote Taklamakan Desert. but the exact location was lost, and it would take 60 years for Chinese archaeologists to relocate it. And what they would find truly baffled archaeologists around the world. Hundreds of boat-shaped coffins capped with an oar-like marker in the ground. Inside were bodies almost perfectly preserved by the dry, salty air of the region. The oldest date back to 4,000 years ago, only a few centuries after the pyramids of Giza were built. But it was the mummies themselves that sparked controversy. They had light skin, red hair, deep-set eyes, and tall builds more similar to modern Europeans than East Asian populations. And DNA would confirm that these people were from the Siberian steppe with no trace of East Asian ancestry. Thousands of years before the Silk Road, these people spread across some of the most hostile land on the planet and made their home in modern China. They wore felt hats and strange dyed clothing. Burials had bronze tools, wheat, and the wheel. They left behind no writing or permanent structures. Over the centuries, they seem to have gradually mixed with local Asian populations. We can tell this from the genetics of later mummies. The most interesting find has to be the shaman of Yanghai. A 2,700-year-old mummy of a 45-year-old man was buried with 2 pounds of potent cannabis. That is an incredible amount of drugs, probably used for his shamanistic rituals. Beyond this, he had a musical instrument and boots adorned with bells, all of which are highly associated with shamanistic practices. He likely belonged to the Gushi people, a nomadic Indo-European people that lived on the edge of the Chinese world. His lavish burial suggests he had high social status, likely helping to heal his community as a shaman. His burial remains one of the most overt examples of a shaman in the archaeological record. Many other mummies were found in the Tarim Basin, and I definitely recommend further reading. It's a really insane region, and the archaeology obviously is crazy. But the next cave discovery is truly one in a billion. A cave made out of a rhino. Some 15 million years ago, a rhino was chewing on grass when a nearby volcano erupted. The rhino was completely entombed by lava, cooling the molten rock around it. Here it sat for millions of years until rockhounds in 1935 discovered it. They knew a lot about rocks, and they could tell that the hollow impression was extremely strange. What's more is that they found the rhino's actual bones still inside. Paleontologists made it to the site and confirmed that the remains belonged to Diceratotherium, an ancestor of modern rhinoceros. But this species lived roughly 15 million years ago. The hollow impression consisted of the entire body cavity, the head, and 4 limbs, one of them which you can climb into to view the entire body. The skeletal remains were mostly fragments that were piled up in one of the leg cavities. I literally thought this was a hoax at first when someone recommended I add it to the script, but I looked it up and I was very surprised. This has got to be one of the most unique fossils ever discovered. And it makes you wonder if there's any other fossils like this, like what if a whole mammoth got buried by, magma or something else. You never know what you might find out there, that's for sure. But next, we're going to cover one of the most bizarre Ice Age finds, a cave toy. In the cave of Hohlfels in southern Germany, archaeologists discovered the world's oldest functional phallus device, if you pick up what I'm putting down. It was made to be life-sized, polished smooth with etching around anatomical features. These details make it certainly a depiction of a phallus, though whether it was ever personally used, we will never know. It did have some evidence that it was used for flint-knapping a tool, but the wear was very limited, suggesting its main function was for something else. I should note that phallus carvings are found throughout the Ice Age and are pretty common. Many of them are made out of bone and may have also been functional. It makes you realize that humans have been very human for time immemorial. But now we're moving on to the deepest tier, disturbing mysteries. And we are starting off with by far the most mysterious Neanderthal site ever discovered. At Brunequil Cave in southern France, archaeologists discovered strange structures over 1,000 feet deep into the cave. They consisted of bizarre arrangements of stalagmites. Over 4,000 of these stalagmites were broken off and placed into 2 main rings. The total weight of the stalagmites moved is over 2 tons. Evidence of fire was found at multiple points on the structure. Uranium-thorium dating found that they were constructed 174,000 years ago, meaning it must have been made by Neanderthals, making it the only monumental stone structure ever made by them. Fire pits in the stone rings showed evidence of repeated fires for centuries. When looking at the bigger picture of the site, it is apparent that it was some kind of ritual or sacred cave. Why would a group of Neanderthals spend hours deep underground choking on smoke working on a seemingly pointless structure? The vast majority of cave habitation sites consisted of shelters at the mouth of the cave, but this was over 1,000 feet deep in the dark. The evidence of fire on the wall of the circles also makes no sense for practical purposes. Furthermore, There are no stone tools or evidence of the butchery of animals. It really appears that this site was exclusively symbolic. Caves themselves are also seen as portals to the underworld or other dimensions by ancient cultures. There is no reason why Neanderthals couldn't have come up with their own mythology or spiritual beliefs around caves. The truth is that we'll never know, but the site of Bernuquel remains one of the most mysterious ever found. But now we are moving to a much more brutal ancient hominid site, Cima de los Huesos, or the Pit of Bones. In 1975, a graduate student excavating a deep chasm in Spain discovered the remains of a derringer bear, an ancestor of the later cave bear that spread all across Eurasia. But underneath this bear, he found something far stranger, the jawbone of a human. Realizing how old the bear itself was, this human jawbone must have been hundreds of thousands of years old. Large-scale excavation ensued, uncovering 7,000 bone fragments in this single pit, the most dense hominid accumulation ever discovered. Multiple dating techniques confirmed a date of 430,000 years old, meaning these hominins lived before our species or Neanderthals even existed. 29 individuals in total were represented, and their features revealed them to be early ancestors to the lineage that would become Neanderthals. At an average of 5 foot 7 inches tall and 200 pounds, they were stocky, strong individuals built for a hard life. But how did so many individuals end up buried in a deep, isolated chasm? Well, one skull helped to answer that question. Meet Cranium 17, the skull of a man who was stabbed not once, but twice in the forehead. Both attacks penetrated his skull, either of which would have been fatal. The repeated attacks with the same tool to the left side of his face undeniably proves that another man murdered him, and later, his body was thrown down into the Pit of Bones. This is the earliest evidence of murder in the archaeological record, but soon, an even more horrifying picture would appear. 2 more craniums had vicious blows to the left side of their face as well, with many other craniums having suspicious physical trauma. Others could have easily had wounds to their flesh which have now rotted away and left no evidence. It is clear that these hominids died violent deaths and were brought to the Pit of Bones to be disposed of. While the violence must have been traumatic for their family and friends, their burial at this site was likely done out of compassion. An enemy would much rather leave you dead in a field for the hyenas to eat, but the extra effort of carrying a 200-pound carcass and placing it deep within a cave suggests deep compassion. The site reveals the violent and loving world that ancient humans emerged from. Even before our species or Neanderthals, hominids were fighting and burying their dead. As the saying goes, war never changes. But next, we are moving on to possibly the oldest artwork ever appreciated, the Makenspengat Kabel. It was discovered in 1925 in a South African cave by a teacher. It is a small reddish-brown pebble that appears to have a human face on it. With just a glance, the resemblance to a hominid face is striking. This is a classic case of pareidolia, where we perceive meaningful patterns in something random or ambiguous. But what makes this pebble so fascinating is that it was found alongside Australopithecus africanus, a human ancestor which lived nearly 3 million years ago. These apes had a brain roughly the size of a chimpanzee, but walked entirely upright. And funny enough, it even resembles the face of an Australopithecine more than a modern human. The similarity is really striking. But it wasn't actually carved, this was just the natural shape of the cobble. But based on the type of the stone it was made of, it must have come from over 20 miles away. Meaning an Australopithecine must have found this and carried it all the way there. At between 2.4 to 2.9 million years old, this is the earliest example of a symbolic object in the archaeological record. These Australopithecines were undoubtedly primitive in every sense of the word, yet this object may be evidence of their developing humanity. But next it's getting more gruesome, because we're moving to the Blood Cave, an ancient Maya ritual site. This cave is only accessible during the dry season, as during the other months it's flooded. This feature naturally connected it to the Mayan rain god Chak, and to appease this deity in times of drought, humans were sacrificed. Over a 650-year span starting 2,400 years ago, over 100 individuals were sacrificed. Adults and children alike were offered to the gods. The cave is littered with obsidian blades and red ochre, used in ritual ceremonies. The remains of the poor victims still lay on the surface, some with clear injuries to their skulls. Some consist of just limbs, cut from bodies and placed in the cave. Other bones may have been defleshed entirely and left on the floor. The exact nature of these ceremonies remains shrouded in mystery, but it is clear they were extremely gruesome. Human sacrifice is not unique to the cultures of Mesoamerica. It was once practiced all over the world. The ancient Romans and the later Vikings did practice human sacrifice. Even the 19th century witch burnings across Europe are examples of ritual human sacrifice. Thankfully, it's pretty rare nowadays, but not eliminated entirely. Our next haunting discovery comes from Go's Cave. It was inhabited by hunter-gatherers 14,700 years ago towards the end of the last ice age. And here, researchers found extremely disturbing remains. Human skulls turned into cups, leg bones butchered and smashed for their marrow, the other bones discarded along with animal remains. It is clear that humans were being treated no differently than the animals in the cave. These people were eating humans and turning their remains into tools. Were they forced into cannibalism, or did they enjoy the taste of human flesh? Well, there were plenty of large animal remains alongside the human remains. Animals have way more meat than even several humans, at least the ones they were eating. It seems these people were eaten ritualistically, and their remains used for cups, but one arm bone was even engraved with a zigzag. Go's Cave reminds us that there is not one way to handle death, and while horrific to us, the practice of cannibalism and human butchery was fairly normal back in the day. But now we're moving on to one of the most gruesome discoveries of all. In 1908, an archaeologist in Germany entered a cave and found 34 human skulls arranged in strange nests. The skulls in Offnet Cave were dated to 9,700 years ago, proving them to belong to Stone Age hunter-gatherers. They were found with a type of red pigment called red ochre on them, and thousands of snail shell beads. This originally swayed archaeologists to think of the site as a compassionate burial. But a gruesome realization came when they found out that the jaws and vertebrae were still attached to the skulls. All of these people were decapitated and placed in the cave. Further examination revealed deep slashes over the skulls. They were victims of violence. Researchers formed two main hypotheses. These people were ritually sacrificed and placed in the cave as an offering. Alternatively, they were killed in battle and their own people buried only their heads. It's a lot easier to transport a head, and other finds in Germany from the same time suggest that head burial was practiced. Whatever happened at Offnet Cave, it is clear that life 10,000 years ago was brutal, and the cultures that inhabited the world were strange. That will wrap up our Ancient Cave Oddities Iceberg. I learned a ton of things myself just by researching this video, and I hope you guys did too. Please like and subscribe and comment what iceberg topic I should do next. And shout out to Evolve.2 for helping me out with this script. Go check them out. In the meantime, YouTube thinks you'll want to watch this video right here. Go check it out, it's just like this one but 1,000 times better.